Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Can I have some quick just confirmation out there that you can hear me and that the level's good? You may notice that the screen looks a little bit different tonight. I am streaming at a much lower quality of broadcast, but I shouldn't really run any danger of getting cut off by the millions of people streaming their Tiger King or their Office reruns. So that's a lot better. I am. This is I wanted to go even thinner in my ratio aspect cam because I wanted to actually replicate the lighthouse, but it's not quite going to make it without some custom settings, and I'm just not that good a tech guy. So I wanted to come on tonight and talk about something because it's specific, and the thumbnail is a little clickbaity. I'll be honest with you, because I'm not going to get into Trump or into Biden or any of the mess that is our national political scene, but I didn't completely lie either, because I was watching the In Search of Darkness documentary. You know, it'll take you 17 years to get through the whole thing. And it has its ebbs and valleys. Definitely, it has its really great stuff, and then it has like, why are we doing this? Why are we even giving like 5 minutes of a retrospective for a film that we've all heard all the stories from? But it's comfort food as entertainment. However, right at the start of this documentary, there is a bit where Alex Winter talks about why he thinks the 80s were so popular of a time for the horror genre. And he regurgitates something that we've all heard a lot. I mean, a lot. And I'm going to restate it in a second, and I'm going to be fair with how I restate it. Not exactly in his words, which I don't think are fair. And then we're going to take a look at whether it's true or not, whether there's anything to it, or if it's really kind of a narrow view. So the old chestnut that Alex Winter gives us for the millionth time is that the horror genre does best when a Republican is in office. Yeah, Cam got to it before I did. I guess my suspense just didn't work. You knew where it was going. So the thing is it true? There's not a good way to really look into it as a metric to find this out. I mean, you could plot every film and what it made or the amount of tickets it sold, and you could go through the entire history of the horror film in America and then correlate it over to who was in office. But you know what? No one's going to do that, and it still wouldn't really tell this story, because there's so much that goes into it. Is it a popularity issue? Is it box office? I mean, when you look at the doc itself, a lot of those titles they're covering as if they're modern classics were actually failures at the box office. So no matter how you look at the subject, you're going to come up with certain biases. And I would like to, if we could, eliminate the biases and just look at it straight up and down. To do that, what I've done is I've taken the most influential titles of the genre, looked at the year they came out and who was in office, as well as what was going on in the world, what was the top news stories of that time. Now, someone's going to object, because that is going to happen, that we're talking about the release of the films, not necessarily when the movies were made. And yes, it takes a couple of years from initial development to a film being broadcast onto a screen. So obviously, what was in the zeitgeist at the moment of creation isn't necessarily the same as when we saw it. But that doesn't really play into popularity, right? People decide to go see what's playing at the movie theater today, not what's being made today. So I think it's still valid, even if it takes a couple of years for the themes to catch up to the newsletter, to the headlines in the newspaper. So 1931 is the beginning of the American horror boom. There are American horror films before, but there's nothing that was really a game changer or a title that people rallied around. Both Dracula and Frankenstein come out in 1931 from Universal, and they change everything. Horror was not just a viable genre in America, it was the viable genre in America. It was the one that the studios could really rely on. The studios were still very nascent. There was a lot of people producing films that we wouldn't think of as studios today, even though they made multiple films. There were still, coin machine operators making films, for instance, for the Boardwalk Amusements. So it's a little bit strange because we're at that point in the early 30s where it's just really coming into the system we know. But that said, Dracula and Frankenstein really helped pave the way for not just horror, but cinema as we think of it today. They were sound films, they played wide, they played at dedicated movie theaters. And Herbert Hoover was president of the United States, a Republican. So it would seem that this holds to Alex Winter's viewpoint. Of course, the Republican Party of 1931 was a fairly isolationist party. They were supporting a lot of social programs that the modern party wouldn't support. In fact, the voting base was pretty different in all but the most extreme northern territories. But regardless of that, what was going on at the time? Well, Japan had invaded Manchuria, which was actually the real start of World War II. Just in the Pacific, we weren't involved. We were very much not going to get involved at that point. In the Midwest, there was the Dust Bowl. So a good portion of the country was fighting an extreme drought that led to shortages of fuel and food, a real hardship for a big part of the country. And unemployment was at 16.3% at its height. Sound familiar? As the Great Depression was rearing up. So there was a lot going on in the culture at the time. And that argument about during hard times, people like horror films, is it that? Is it the president? I don't know. In 1942, Cat People comes out, and Cat People is an extremely different sort of influential because before that, these were monster movies that were made for a very wide audience. Yes, adults were going to see the films and being traumatized in theaters and being taken out on stretchers in the case of Frankenstein, but they were always made with somewhat of a traditional monster movie matinee type of feel. These were films that were okay for children. Cat People is explicitly an adult film. It's explicit in its approach to the genre, in its thematics, and its sexuality. So very different kind of influential. I don't think you can compare the box office with Frankenstein or Dracula, but it was the first time a major hit came across that was adult in the genre. So I would definitely consider it to be an extremely valid entry on this list. If you really reject that, just go with The Wolfman. It was released a year earlier in 1941. Just sub that out. In either case, Franklin Roosevelt was president, a Democrat. The U.S. entered World War II. The Nazis opened Auschwitz, which we didn't know at the time, but there were in certain communities whispers of the atrocities. 1960, Psycho comes out. Dwight Eisenhower is in the White House. He's a Republican. Francis Gary Power was shot down over Russia, which escalated the Cold War. Cuba was buying oil from the Soviet Union for the first time, which was a major, major escalation as well. So we have a lot of Cold War headlines and a feeling that we were rushing towards another hot war. By 1969, the release of Night of the Living Dead, Lyndon Johnson, a Democrat, was in office. We saw a lot of social unrest start to build that we really associate with the 60s. The Stonewall riots in New York City. We had Vietnam raging across the world. We had the Charles Manson murders. We had Altamont. There's a lot of social unrest building. 1973, we have The Exorcist come out. Richard Nixon is in office, obviously a Republican. We have Watergate, and we have Roe versus Wade, which is extremely divisive in America. 1975, the birth of the blockbuster with Jaws. Gerald Ford is in office. We have the fall of Saigon. We have 2 assassination attempts on the President of the United States in pretty quick succession. And Pol Pot really seizes his power and opens Cambodia up to the killing fields. 1978, Halloween is released. Jimmy Carter is in office. Gandhi is expelled from the Indian Parliament. The Red Brigade terrorists kill a former premier of Italy. And Jimmy Carter is still in office for the release of Friday the 13th in 1980. At that point, we saw the gas shortages. We saw the Iran-Contra we saw not Iran-Contra, I'm sorry. We saw Iran take the hostages from our embassy. We saw the Cuban Missile Crisis. Not the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban refugee crisis start to build, and Mount St. Helens erupted. In 1999, Blair Witch Project comes out. Bill Clinton is president, a Democrat. The WTO protests in Seattle go extremely violent. We have NATO going to war in Yugoslavia. We had an earthquake in Chile. We have an earthquake in Turkey that killed 13,000 people overnight. In 2004, Saw came out, ushering in the torture porn wave. And George Bush is president, a Republican. Obviously, we have both Afghanistan and Iraq raging. 2013, The Conjuring comes out. Barack Obama, a Democrat, is in office. And we had the Boston Marathon bombing. We had a typhoon that hit the Philippines, which was one of the most devastating national disasters in world history. And Nelson Mandela died. So when we look at this, now you could choose to say that I picked the wrong titles or that I've weighed this one way or another. Maybe you can find another title when a different president of a different party is in. But I think all these titles were extraordinarily influential, and I don't think anyone's really going to really argue with the bulk of them. I think cat people might be the most vulnerable, but I think that's more a matter of perspective. It's not a title that you'd say I'm wrong about. You'd just choose something else. So that's why I gave you the Wolfman as an alternative. But the interesting thing is there's 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats in office when the most influential films come out, and those influential films really start waves of horror in which a lot of popularity and a lot of Hollywood's capital rushes into the horror genre. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's nice to think that when one party, especially if it's a party you don't like, is in power, that horror does really well because people are trying to escape the real horrors of our world. It's nice and comforting, but it really doesn't bear out. I don't believe that the president makes all, or the party in power makes all that much difference. I think when you saw the issues that were happening at the time of the releases, that might play a little bit better to the argument that it's whatever's in the popular zeitgeist, that our current fears are kind of invading cinema. And maybe that's where the escapist nature comes. But I don't think it's as easy as left versus right. Now, maybe you think I'm wrong. If so, I'd love to hear the argument, but I don't think the numbers really bear it out. I would also say that it's interesting that when you look at something like the Cold War, instead of horror doing really well during the Cold War, which by that kind of logic seems to be a good case, the 50s were really not a very serious time. I mean, you have Invasion of the Body Snatchers, yes, but other than that, you have a lot of big insects. So it's interesting that I think we like the idea of including politics in everything and finding a way for them to be relevant in every subject. I like politics. I'm kind of a weird bird in politics, but I don't really think that it has anything to do with my enjoyment of horror as a genre. I think social issues are definitely combined because it has to do with how we tell stories. But in all honesty, I think that this is an argument that's made by people who are obsessed with politics and just want it to be relevant to everything. And I don't mean to pick on Alex Winter, but I don't think if he was a moderate, he would have taken the time to espouse this old chestnut one more time. So I'd love to know what you guys think in the chat. Just for the record, because I don't think it's fair to have this conversation without saying where I stand. Many of you already know I am a libertarian. Right now, I'm supporting Jim Gray for president. He was a judge. He was a Congress member. He's running for the nomination of the Libertarian Party. So I don't really have a dog in the hunt, left or right, on this one. Steak Sauce says he'd like to pick on Alex Winter. Well, you have the floor, sir. Pick on some Alex Winter. Cam says one could argue that horror is at least aggressive when a Democrat is in office. Is least aggressive. I'm sorry. He states one could argue that horror is least aggressive when a Democrat is in office. Again, I think that's even tough, though, because even if you look at the Reagan years, that form of republicanism is not what we have in office right now. And if you compare John F. Kennedy to Barack Obama, they're very different politically as well. One, was fully willing to go to war in a far-off land to fight communism. The other opened up the Cuban economy to America. I think that the parties continue to evolve and the genre continues to evolve. It might be interesting to try and map that, but again, your data points are going to be picked kind of randomly, I think. It could be. There could be something to it. I just think that if there is, it's very overstated by people's existing political biases. Steak Sauce says noogies and such. I don't think that would cure the problem, but I think he, as someone who pretty much is Bill or Ted, whichever one he was, he might enjoy it. Cam says 69 to 74 horror was off the map. Not as well. That's true. Not as bad as 37 to 38. But yeah, I think that has to do with the fact that when you're going to try and shock people, which horror tends to have to do, between Night of the Living Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's a big jump, right? And if you look at all the stuff, whether it's the Manson killings or Vietnam, just our access to that kind of violence and brutality had raised so much during that 5-year span that I don't know that horror could really keep up with the pace. And it's weird because you'd see things on the evening news that could not have been released in movie theaters. It was acceptable to see the real stuff, but the fake stuff was still taboo. So it was a weird world. People like Peck and Paw definitely were that bridge to get us through. Steak Sauce says, I think that's the biggest thing. Both the parties have mutated over the course of the decades. They really have, and I think they're both really not just off of the values they once stood for. I think that they are so insulated into their the values that they market that they no longer really have any cohesive message behind the parties. I think that's why it becomes about personalities, why it's Trump and Hillary, or it's almost Coke and Pepsi at a certain point. It doesn't really have any substance to it anymore. It's just about the branding of the parties more than what they believe. I think, anyway. Cam says, last house on the left. Well, yeah, and Craven and Cunningham have both said that, it was a angry scream at the world that would give them Vietnam. Al from Russia says, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was banned in some countries. Aha. It was less than you might think. It was really popular during that time period to market things as banned, whether they were or not, because in a lot of cases they were just not available in those countries. So you just said that it was banned in Argentina. Famously, you've seen the Cannibal Ferox poster that says banned in 31 countries. It didn't even try to play in any of those countries. So, Joe Bob Harhill, hello, and hey, Lauren, what movie or movies had going in had low expectations, but took you by surprise? This is going to sound weird as an example, but what comes to mind is the late 80s were a really rough time for me because I didn't like the jokey horror that the later Elm Street films kind of foisted on the genre and made really popular. I was always just kind of baffled by why people liked that as much as they did, a kind of cheesy gore scene followed by a one-liner. So I was going to see as much as I could because I was still a horror junkie, right? But when I saw something and it looked like a Nightmare on Elm Street film from the outside, I was always like, "Oh no, really? Am I going to do this?" There's a film called Bad Dreams from '88, which I walked in thinking it was going to be a Nightmare on Elm Street ripoff. Thing is, it was, and it is, but in my opinion, it's way better than any of the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels, and I think it legitimately is one of the best horror films of the 1980s. And that was a huge surprise to find myself grinning ear to ear while I watched it when I went in thinking I was going to get Nightmare on Elm Street 4, you know. Al from Russia, Suspiria 2018 definitely had politics in it. Yeah, but to be fair, Suspiria 2018 had everything in it. My problem with that movie, besides I don't like the tinted ending, I think it's a bad creative decision, but my problem with that movie is that it's so dense that all the good stuff that's in it just feels like it has so much weight because of everything else around it. It has so many side plots. It's just so dense. And it's a film that I'm not sure if I ever want to revisit for that reason. Steak sauce. It's like pouring store brand cola into a Pepsi can and a Coke can. Yeah. Except, I have a Weiss brand Diet Orange soda right here, and this is actually pretty good. If the American political parties, if either of them was as good as this soda, then we might be able to talk. And then saying pick one. Yeah. Al from Russia says the two most serious Nightmare on Elm Street films are 1 and 2. I loved part 2 with Mark and Kim Myers. It's my second favorite. It's a big, big, big step down. The films weren't jokey yet, and that's a big reason why I think I give the second one a lot of a pass. It's structurally a mess, and there's things in it that are just really dumb. But overall, it's way better than any of the sequels. I know that people love Dream Warriors. I know it, but it's better than some of the later films. But it started the ball rolling of the comedic elements and the Freddy as anti-hero, and maybe we should be cheering for the kids to die. And it's the film that most directly caused me to hate certain elements of the late 80s horror. I love early 80s horror, but when I hit about 86, I start to really lose my focus because, again, that kind of like pot humor sensibility of a lot of that late 80s horror is not something that it's just not in my wheelhouse at all. Joe Bob Tar Heel says, okay, I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it yet. Check it out. Definitely check Bad Dreams out. It's available on double feature disc with Visiting Hours, which is a great underrated slasher film starring Michael Ironside. Steak sauce. Are you drinking Diet Orange because you think you're fat? I am overweight, sir. However, I have lost 12 pounds in the last 3 months, and I have about another 15 to maybe 18 that I want to lose before I'll be okay. I have always had kind of issues with my weight. Not as a kid. As a kid, I was thin as a rail. Then about 19 years old, I kind of ballooned up. And then in my 30s, I brought myself back down. And then I get big and I get not big. So it's a thing in my life. I'll never have a stable weight. Sauce says, because you're not, you could be drinking regular soda if you wanted. Disagree, but thank you. Joe Bob Tar Heel, are you a fan of AC/DC? If so, favorite album? I like AC/DC's early stuff a lot. I like rock and roll a lot, so it's hard to not like AC/DC. I would say Who Made Who is the last great AC/DC album, and obviously there's a lot of re-recorded tracks on that, so that album even cheats. This is going to come as a surprise to a lot of people, but I'd say 74 Jailbreak is actually their masterpiece. I know a lot of people just probably clicked off the video. Steak Sauce says, congrats on the weight loss. So, Sauce, this time is not a big deal. I know what I have to do. I know the math. I have to keep my calories under 1,800 a day. I walk for an hour a day, which pulls 230 calories off me. So if I eat right up to the 1,800 calories, I still am I'm still not taking in, about 230 calories a day, which over the course of a week is like not eating a meal for an entire day. So that's how you lose it. I don't do a traditional fast. I spread it out, but it's just numbers. This is math. There's no magic, no pills work, none of that. But when I was much bigger and I lost a lot of weight, there was a lot of things I had to change, and soda was one of those things. But Alpha Mercer says, "Congratulations, Lauren." Well, thanks, guys. I sometimes get to the point where I look in the mirror and I say, I got to go do it again. I wish there was a Salad Works near me because I love that company. When I was working, at one point I had a Salad Works next to me, and I went every day for lunch, and I was never tired of it. I love it. I just don't have that option right now. Alice from Russia says, I'm on a diet to low carb, no sugar. Well, that's a great way. Now, the thing is, I'm just a calorie guy. The thing is, carbs are just high calorie and sugar is high calorie. So you're basically doing what I am doing. I just don't cut out sugar or carbs necessarily. I love rice and I let myself have rice, but that just means later in the day, I just can't have something else. And, the empty calorie stuff, you just got to cut out. But if you just keep an eye on it, I don't track it. I don't keep a diary or anything, but if you just stick with it, and if you have one day that goes left, that's fine. Al says, I walk 1 hour a day to lift weights, eat once a day. 5'11", 230. Well, you're taller than I am, sir. So you can definitely have a little bit more meat on you than me and still look okay. So, yeah, SolidWorks does rule. Yeah, I mean, this whole thing, I could do a video on SolidWorks, honestly. I will tell you that their bacon club is just the turkey bacon club salad, which is like 400 calories. I don't do dressing, so I could eat it every day, and it's the best thing you could possibly do for yourself. So, Stick Sauce says, I love a good salad. I don't have a clue what a Salad Works is, though. That's because you're in the wrong part of the state, sir. Vanderhoff, 66FU. Hey, guys. Well, hello, sir. How are you? Thank you for joining me. I feel like I'm the Piz pregame show, but that's okay. Steak Sauce is next week. Salad Works deep dive. So that's kind of one of the things I'd like to do with this channel is have it just be very informal, and we can talk about more things than just horror. I'm always going to talk horror because it is my thing. Yeah, no, I mean, I really want this to be about building community, not just for myself. The former Sausage Factory crew, all of us have channels, and we're all putting content out. I'd like us all to be growing, and that's why the evolution that you're going to see next fall is so important. I know a lot of people are kind of bummed that the name's being retired, but this next chapter is going to be so good as a community. The idea that we can all help each other grow and build. At the beginning of the chat, you saw, Cam was talking about his new channel, his spin-off channel that he and I just did a Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake commentary on. This is all part of the same issue. We want to get out there and really build a community for you guys and for ourselves. And I think it's important. And unfortunately, the Sausage Factory name had become enough of a liability that there was those of us who definitely presented to Piz the idea that it was time to evolve. And to Piz's great credit, he was willing to listen and really give us a voice at the table, which he didn't need to do. The Sausage Factory was always his thing, But I think the future is going to be very, very, very bright. And I think the first episode of the new season of the new unnamed show is going to catch you guys off guard by how frigging great it's going to be. Okay, Vanderhoff, 66. I'm drinking way too much beer during this shit. Well, that's why you need to get yourself some cheap-ass generic orange soda. Al from Russia says, we live, breathe, eat, sleep, horror. Yeah, well, actually, that's pretty true. I would say that the horror genre is something I think about almost from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed at night. I do at least an hour of writing every day, and that's in the genre. I usually watch something in the genre, and I'm always thinking either about my work or about something I saw. If you guys didn't see the movie Sea Fever that just hit streaming platforms. I've been thinking about that film more than I thought I would after I finished watching it. It's really very, very good. It is really bleak, though. It's really, really, really not a happy movie. So if you want something light and cheerful, it's not the movie. But if you're like me and I can watch, you know, Alien 3 every day because it's such a happy movie, then you'll enjoy it for the reasons I do. Joe Bob Tarho, 74 Jailbreak People wasn't released in 74. It was a special album for the 10th anniversary in 84, if I'm not mistaken. I believe you are correct, sir, but I was just pointing out that it was my favorite AC/DC project. Simply because you can really hear the chops and you can hear the creativity. They didn't worry about having to create that perfect 2.5 minute, like double entendre pop song. Al from Russia says, ha ha, Van. And Steak Sauce says, I'm excited for the rebrand. I'm glad to hear it. Keep letting players know that you're excited because he's taking a chance here. He really is. He's been the solid driver behind the steering wheel for a long time, and he's still going to occupy that role. But he's starting to listen to the passengers, and I think that it's brave and it's smart, and it's all the things that I really, really have always looked up to Biz for. Joe Bob Taro says, favorite AC/DC album is Highway to Hell and Who Made Who. Well, again, Who Made Who cheats, though, because it recycles material and re-records. I like it, too, but Highway to Hell is great, but it's an album of up and downs for me, too. Steak Sauce says, I'd love to see more comedy mixed in. I know that this isn't going to come from you, however, and that's okay. Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things that we were discussing is the fact that it's going to be okay to arrange the shows, format the shows in such a way that you guys don't have to worry about like someone like myself who can't talk about the comedy genre, right? It's just I can't. I don't have an interest in it, and I certainly don't have any knowledge of it. But this new format will allow the people who can really talk to that subject to really have the floor. And the same thing, like if you remember the Fulci episode, whereas I've seen more Fulci films than any of the other guys. Well, it became at a certain point like Lauren talks about Fulci. And my thing is, well, that would have been better if we planned for that. If we formatted the show around that idea, then it would have been a little bit smoother. So again, get excited because this is going to be really good. And it's not, I'm not a big supporter of this because it's going to help me. I'm a big supporter of this because I think it's going to be great. It's going to make the show even greater. Piz is funny. That is very true. Piz has great comic timing, and he has great dramatic instincts, which is the thing you guys probably don't see because there's kind of two things that go on. There's a in front of the camera, and there's the behind the camera stuff that is planning to be in front of the camera. And Piz is very, very good at that. You can tell he did some serious drama classes in school. Steak Sauce says he killed Orc and stole the rights. It's close to true. That's close to true. But I wouldn't count Orc completely out just yet. Maybe not from the Sausage Factory, but I wouldn't be surprised if you eventually saw him again. Maybe sooner rather than later. Al from Russia says, we got to get Piz to do a horror dance-off with Glover versus Mark Patton, Crispin Glover versus Mark Patton tonight. Well, you go for that, sir. Joe Bob Taro says, Razor's Edge is what I meant instead of Who Made Who. Okay. It's later, but I can accept that. Vanderhoff 66 says, always love Rat, great 80s hairband. Not huge in 80s hairband stuff. I mean, I think Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction is a classic rock and roll record that I'd hold up against, the better work of the Stones, for instance. So I'm not blindsided against it. I'm just more of a punk rock guy. I just kind of am. Punk, industrial, roots rock. So, I mean, and if you go back to the beginning of the chat, while I was setting myself up for tonight, I was listening to My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult and Public Enemy. So I'm all over the place, but let's do. Darren Burrow says, "Hi, Lauren. Do you ever listen to horror podcasts? Dead Pit Radio got me back into horror back in 2007. I've listened to very few. I do listen to Brian Keene's podcast, perhaps not as religiously as I should. Um, uh, Brian's a good guy. I've known him for a long time, so that helps. Dead Pit, I have obviously heard episodes um, from back in the day, but it really wasn't on my radar. I think geographics make a difference. I was hearing about a lot more stuff from northern people, mid-Atlantic state people at that point. Alf Mercer says, Alien, good heavy metal 80s rock, brave new love song made by Alien, played on the end credits of 1988's The Blob. Well, if we're talking about hair metal in movies, obviously Fastway's soundtrack for Trick or Treat is the gold standard. It sounds like of its time, but because it kind of has leniency because the movie was about that time. So I always associate both. And I like Fastway as a band until they changed the vocalists, and then it went downhill pretty fast. Rush's Ashes says, your opinions on Fulci and Blatty made me wonder if I was born of the same witchcraft. Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, like, I remember Fulci being like shit on constantly by horror fans. Those cheesy, badly made films from Italy, and I never got it. I always thought they were beautiful, wonderful films, and it's nice that today you never get those criticisms. Everyone kind of acknowledges that he was a master working, and you don't get the problem. As far as Blatty goes, you have to be an idiot really not to recognize his genius, and in some ways, I do wish that Blatty was known for more than just The Exorcist. In recent years, Legion has finally been getting its due, but the man was an incredible writer across genres. I mean, he wrote Pink Panther movies. He wrote novels about his mother. He wrote satires, essays that are just killer satires. He was just a great writer. I know this is a very fine line for some punk fans, but are you keen on hardcore? Well, Andrew, I am. Okay, I want to state this properly. If you're talking about something like Minor Threat or Reason to Believe, I absolutely love hardcore. And if you're talking about kind of the modern post-hardcore scene, there are bands I like in that. But in the middle there's a lot of bands that just blend together and I could never get into because they all kind of sound the same. I'm a little bit on the old side for that, all the like 88 to 92, 93 hardcore. I was already kind of investigating like more just straight up rock and roll at that point in my life. But when I was going to City Gardens in Trenton, New Jersey, and Airport Music Hall in Allentown, Pennsylvania, every weekend when I was a teenager, I was going to see traditional punk bands mostly. Now, it did include stuff like Agnostic Front, which people at the time were calling hardcore, but like in revisionist history, we wouldn't call that now. Alpha Russia asks, did I like Inferno? You talk about Argento's Inferno. I love it, but it's because it looks and feels like a Mario Bava film. It really, and I know I'm going to get shit for this, but I've always considered it to be actually a sequel to Black Sunday, not Suspiria. And if you really know Black Sunday, that will make sense to you. But Bava actually did work on the film. He did the underwater sequences, all his blocking and photography. So I don't think I'm off base. I think if you wanted that final stab at Bava, you can't go wrong with Inferno. Okay. Vanderhoff asked, I finally watched The Beyond last week, and I'm a bigger fan of House by the Cemetery. So am I, my man. Although, here's the thing, they do different things. House by the Cemetery is a poem. It is a prose poem. It's beautiful. I'll discuss the ending with you on a different podcast because I can clear up any confusion about that ending. But The Beyond is a different animal. The Beyond is a fever dream. It is it's like staring into the sun for too long and getting kind of sunburnt and drunk off of just the overexposure to UV rays. It's an insane movie, and it's somewhat cosmetically wrong. There's things that shouldn't work, but it has this weird sense of unreality to it. I find it to be an amazing piece of cinema, but if you want to know which film I like more, yeah, it's House by the Cemetery. It's actually my favorite. It's my favorite of Fulci's films. Um, Fulci or Argento, which is your favorite? Of those two, Fulci, definitely. Although I was just having this conversation with Christian Hanover. It's actually an ongoing conversation because I keep trying to convince him to check out Sergio Martino. I really like Martino, and I think he should be put in the sentence alongside Fulci and Argento whenever they're compared. Because I think if you look at All the Colors of the Dark, it's just as much a masterpiece as anything either of those gentlemen did as well. So check out Martino. House of the Devil is great, says Vanderhoff. I agree. I did like Innkeepers more, but I like both films a lot. Andrew says, I'm definitely talking about bands of that ilk. Cro-Mags, Gorilla Biscuits, Agnostic Front. Yeah, so I mean, I was lucky because I worked for 13 years in music retail, whereas I was both managing a store, buying the product from the independent labels for the small chain I worked for, and I was also handling all their t-shirt distribution, sales and distribution. So it was funny because it would give me some access, and one of my funniest memories is actually playing pool with the guys from Civ. So you mentioned Gorilla Biscuits, so I throw that out there. So how's that for a name drop? It's like you and I are the only ones that know what I'm talking about. House of the Devil rules. It does. Al asks, Lauren, did you like the 70s film Piranha? I do. It's not a film I revisit a lot, but it was one that I discovered on channel 17 on the UHF dial when I was fairly young. And it was a weird film because they always show it uncut. But it was always on at like 11 o'clock at night. But they showed it uncut at that time, and that never happened. I think when you look at Piranha, it's pretty rough today, and there's some just weird decisions in it. But I love that period of filmmaking, that kind of late 70s, even up to about 82, where it's like it was still like an anything goes punk rock world in the world of horror. You could just kind of do anything. I always say that if Maniac, for instance, is, to me, that's Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols as a film, because it feels like just a raw burst of power, just a warning shot across the bow of popular polite culture. Hey, this is what we can do now. And there was no going back from it either. Once, that ball was rolling, you needed Jack Valenti and the MPAA to try and shut the genre down because it had just hit a point where it was too dangerous. And the same thing happened in music with the Pistols, where it's like, the British political system just came to bear on a band, which is just an insane moment. Rush's Ashes says Fulci was far more prolific, a working man's director. His art was his job, and he worked like my dad, who was a comic artist, so just knocked so much shit out so fast. My dad was a mechanic, and we didn't have a lot of money growing up. I've said that before. I don't want to really dwell on it, but my dad was always working. He worked a day job fixing school buses. Then at night, he was always working for another hour or 2 hours on either a driver's vehicle or someone he knew who had dropped off a vehicle in our at our house. He was always working. Every weekend there was someone's vehicle he was working on, always. So I hear you. Nico Mendez, I'm really perplexed by the cool reception many Argento fans give Stendhal Syndrome. I think it's his most disturbing, haunting, beautiful of his post-opera films. Love to get your take on it. Just talked about this with Cam. We did a commentary on opera. So if you want to hear kind of a healthy section about Stendhal Syndrome, I do talk pretty much at length there about it on his channel. That's All This Filming, Is It Healthy? But the short side of it is this. I like Stendhal Syndrome. I think it's his last great film. It's a step down from the classic period, but I actually like it more than opera, and I'm in the minority on that. I just think there are moments that have that kind of Argento transcendence that we used to get back in the, Suspiria, Deep Red days. And it was the last time I really saw that level of perfection from him. Vanderhoff says a really good 80s creature movie is Humanoids from the Deep. Well, sure, because it's, Corman off the chain. Again, I think there's that whole, devil may do mentality to that stuff. Again, I'd compare it with punk rock in that, the creature from the Black Lagoon is going to rape people in this movie. Go for it. There's something about that carefree spirit of exploitation where they really embrace the idea that, you know what, people are going to want to see this, so let's give it to them. As opposed to now where they'd overthink it. Oh, well, how can we do it, but not do it so much that it would offend people? Back then they were just like, just do it. And I love that. Steak Sauce says, I hung out with Slapshot all the time, all day at a musical festival in San Antonio a few years ago. Well, that's cool, sir. That's really cool. Vanderhoff says, I worked in a record shop in 1988 at the Rockaway Mall in Rockaway, New Jersey. Those were the times. Tell you what, man, about a decade and a half later, I ran a record store in the Rockaway Mall in New Jersey. Darren Burrows says, I think Mother of Tears and Sleepless are criminally underrated. I'm going to disagree with you. I think Mother of Tears is rushed and unsuccessful. I really wanted it to be that classic Argento, and he thought he had the scene with the baby in the bridge. He thought he had his transcendent moment there, but it just fails. To me, it doesn't work as a film, and that ending is not satisfying for that trilogy. Sleepless. Sleepless and Giallo and Do You Like Hitchcock all kind of blend together to me. It's hard for me to really separate them in my mind, but I remember like turning them off and saying, if it wasn't Argento, I'd be okay with that. But for Argento, I'm not okay with that. But I'm glad to see you love this stuff. You want to know, here's the thing, like I outside of Friday Part 5, I like when people like things that aren't my cup of tea, because that means that there's room for all of us, and that means that someday someone's going to make something that works perfectly for me but not for you. If it was only the stuff I like, that means I would be being catered to and I'd get bored. I have to be disappointed sometimes in order to be in love with stuff. Just how it is. Al from Rush asks, Lauren, did you like Night School? It's all right. I don't revisit it. I haven't seen it in a very long time. If you're telling me that I should revisit it, that there's something I missed in the previous viewings, then I'll consider it. So hit me up. Let me know. Vanderhoff says, that's pretty cool. I worked at Wall to Wall Sound and Video, and it was still there when I was running the compact discounts on the second floor, down from the Victoria's Secret. Vanderhoff says, that's pretty cool. Sorry. River says, hey, Lauren, I enjoy your show, man. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I actually think that I might come off a little bit better on these live performances than on the pre-recorded stuff. I was called out as boring and bald and having the voice of a member of the Lollipop Guild by a member of Twitter this week. And I think they wanted to get me upset, but I laughed so hard. That's kind of awesome. So Alpha Marisha is laughing. Yeah, that's the thing too. I want to say this, like, because in our last few moments that we have here before we're all going to head over to Piz's channel, I'm not for everyone, and I'm not just okay with that. I'm like good with it, because I don't want to be everything to everyone. I would be lying or chasing some rainbow that too many people are chasing. I like authenticity. If there's going to be people who don't deal with me, that's great, because that means that for those who get me, you guys are really going to get me, So I'm really, really not upset by that stuff. So, if you know that situation, please don't unfollow her. Don't get angry. Don't send her a message. I had one person tell me they were going to, and I stopped them cold, and I said, no, it's cool. It's cool. I am big on the democracy of thought. Okay, so let's see. Darren Burrow says, Night School always reminded me of what have they done to your daughters. It is a decent giallo, and I'd have to like search my memory to see if I feel that. Now you're gonna make me go back and watch it. That's what you're gonna do. Vanderhoff says rock horror movies are great. Rock and Roll Nightmare, Trick or Treat, Black Roses, and Shock 'em Dead and Deathgasm. I wouldn't really consider Deathgasm in those because it's so different. Deathgasm doesn't really lean on being a rock and roll film. It's just part of its DNA. The only one I'd really call out for you is Black Roses. The special effects on those monsters is so bad that, yeah, you can laugh at it, but I don't know. I actually have a lot of love for Trick or Treat, and I probably shouldn't because it's not as successful as I always think of it as, but I do really like that film. Steak sauce. I'm not a Happy Meal. So, ironically, if I was a Happy Meal, I'd come with a toy, and I don't think I should be giving toys to children ever. I'm not good with kids. Darren Bro says, "Don't watch Terror on Tour." You came to me a little bit too late, sir. Maybe a decade and a half too late. All right, I'm going to cut out of here in a minute so that we can go over and watch it. Piz is doing a watch along of The Great Carnival of Souls, a great film that is missing an entire reel of footage in its current form, and I do like the film quite a lot. I always feel a little bit weird about when he shows classic cinema because I really do revere this stuff, and I feel like people like to have fun at it. So it's like I don't get angry at anyone because I get it, but always know that I'm out there somewhere actually loving the movies. Okay. Anyway, thank you guys for watching me for an hour. I really appreciate it. Please do hit up Piz's channel. He should be going on very shortly, and stay safe out there. Don't social distance so much that you lose track of who we are as a people, though. Make sure you're calling your friends, staying in touch. I hate what's going on right now, and I want to build a community while everyone else seems to be putting 6 feet between them. Night, guys.